All right, welcome. You have made it to week one, day 4. You have survived the first week, and we are about to turn up the heat and start getting technical. So, the first half of class, or probably even less than half, going to go through, do our regular recap like we do every day. Touch on office hours really quickly. We're going to watch a video on the software development lifecycle, the SDLC. And hopefully you're going to watch that video and go, huh, that kind of sounds familiar to what we've been doing all week. We're going to talk a little bit about Kanban and get Trello set up. And then we are going to start getting technical after break. So we're going to dive into the command line a little bit. You won't need to use the command line until we get to more back-end programming and JavaScript programming activities. But I think it's a really good introduction into, hey, let's expose you to this now, and then when you need to start using it in a couple weeks, it should come a little bit easier. And if we have time, we are going to start Intro to HTML, which is also called Making a Really Ugly Website. But we're going to actually start getting content on the page and start playing around with that. And then we'll wrap class up with an overview of all the assignments and just give you guys a chance to ask any questions about any homework that you have to do over the weekend, any homework that was due over throughout the week, anything like that. So let's kick it off with yesterday's recap. What have we learned about wireframing and requirements?
That it's like the outline of a website or app before you start making any real changes, like just an outline of what you
Yep.
think you might.
What else?
As far as the requirements, making sure that you understand exactly what they are. So, going back and forth with the client and getting that information and then taking it and breaking it down into smaller chunks.
Yep.
And they're working on the wireframe can lead you to more questions about the requirements.
Absolutely, yeah, and it's a great process to go through because it's better to ask those questions then instead of waiting until you get into code and then having the question. What about yesterday's group activity? What did that expose about UI design or the whole process of doing UI work?
And it can be tricky. Everybody has ideas of how they would like things to be.
Yeah, and it's a very iterative process, right? Of sometimes you design this entire wireframe and you get it out there, and users go, well, it's functional, but I didn't think to click on this over here, or yeah, this works, but it's not easy enough to use. And so oftentimes with design, right, we get into this iteration process where we do release updates and we do change things, or we move buttons around, or there are a lot of analytics used now in user interface design. If you go on Amazon and you look at the Amazon homepage today, and then you look at the Amazon homepage from a year ago, it's very different, but at the same time feels like the same website, right? And that's because they're constantly making tweaks to that homepage layout and figuring out, hey, what's bringing in the most revenue here? What's actually getting clicked on? What doesn't get clicked on? Is it better to have a larger ad or to save an ad until after you've searched for a product? So a lot of iteration that can happen in that UI process for sure. Anything else from yesterday? Anything that you found fun? Anything that you had questions about, after you slept on it? Anything like that?
Yeah.
How connected it is to project management, and have it like being on a project team.
Great question. And we're going to dive into that a little bit more tonight with the software development lifecycle, and just identifying all of those steps. And then we're also going to go through a project management technique tonight called Kanban, Kanban. It's a Japanese concept. It stands for I forget what the Japanese word means, but they'll mention it in the video that we're about to watch. But that is, I went back and forth on project management because, like, project management is, you can take an entire semester's worth of classes on and get certified in and make project management alone a full-time job. And so I was going back and forth of how much project management do we want to teach and what concepts do we want to get into. And Agile is the de facto standard used in project management in software. Waterfall is another technique that you can use with something called a Gantt chart, where you kind of break the project out into timeline sections. But I thought, hey, for week one, let's cover Kanban. Let's cover just a very functional tool that's pretty easy to learn. And let's take that approach for the first project, right? And then down the road, as we get into the curriculum, as there are kind of gaps in the curriculum where I go, oh, we've got a free day here. I think we can get into other project management techniques like Agile and Scrum and Waterfall and all of those kinds of things. But today we'll just be kind of doing intro to project management and showing one easier tool to implement, this Kanban. But hopefully the SDLC and what we're touching on project management will kind of round out the week for how do I think about a project, how do I get a project started, how do I do project requirements, how can I monitor the project once it's going, and then we'll take the second half of class and hopefully, you know, start putting your laptops to use and diving into Terminal and just getting our feet wet in HTML. I've got a whole heck of a lot planned out for HTML. And so whatever we don't finish in today's class will roll over, and that's where we'll pick up starting next week.
Thanks. I had a question about the grid.
Sure.
How come we don't use 24 column grid as opposed to the 12?
Yeah, so I have, from any website I have designed, I have never needed more flexibility than the 24 column grid. I'm sorry, than the 12 column grid. A lot of grid systems that you use are 12 by default, and some grid systems will allow you to adjust that. And so that's why 960.js offers the 12, 16, and 24. Is because if you do need more flexibility beyond the 12, you can adjust it to those systems. But the math starts getting harder, right? So like when I say, oh, I need 3 even columns, it's very easy to do 12 divided by 3 and say, oh, those will be 3 columns that are 4 wide, right? But when you get into the 24s, you're like, 24 divided by 3 is 8, and then I have 8 columns, and then now when I need to adjust that, it gets a little harder. So there are most grid systems start at 12 by default, and then if you need more flexibility, there are sometimes ways to adjust that grid system to make everything be based off of the 24 or the 16. But out of 10 years of professional software development, I never once have said, oh man, I wish we were using the 24 grid instead of the 12 base grid. It's just that flexibility I haven't really needed. Because when you're breaking up websites, it tends to be like, oh, I want this to be, 80% of the screen and this to be 20% of the screen. And it's pretty easy to do that with a 4 column and an 8 column. Or, oh, I would like this to be half the screen, and then I would like this to be a quarter and this to be a quarter. And you can do that with a 6, a 3, and a 3, right? So, if you are working on a design where you're like, oh, this is a really grid-heavy base site, and there are going to be a ton of columns here, you could definitely consider using the 16 or 24. But I have just always used the 12, and that tends to be the default for any CSS-based grid that you use.
Thank you.
Great question, though.
I watched a video about it last night, but I I definitely understand what you're saying, but I couldn't explain what the video.
Yeah.
About some of them in the ways the numbers, it talks about the numbers and how you could break it into so many columns. But it definitely, it's what you're saying, but maybe I'll see if I can share the video later.
Yeah, definitely share that video in Slack, and I can update that resources. Anytime you guys find a resource that you find helpful, please, please, please share it with other students, right? Because if you find it helpful, chances are another student will find it helpful. So definitely feel free to share resources. I am not the end-all, be-all in terms of you know, chances are someone else will be able to teach it better than I will, which is why I lean on videos in class all the time, right? And I'm like, hey, let's watch this and then talk about it at the end. So feel free to share things in Slack. I will update the resources list to include that. And so we will also have it for future cohorts as well. But I will say that the grid system is one of those things that is hard to wrap your head around until you start coding with it. And once you start coding with it, it will be much easier to say, oh, well, I want my nav bar to be, 20% of the screen, so let me start it out as a 4 and see what it looks like. And if it looks too wide, I'm going to adjust it down to a 3. Okay, if I adjust it down to a 3, what's the rest of the screen space available? Well, it's always based off of 12, right? So 12 minus 3 is 9. So my other column is going to take up 9 spaces. And that will make more sense once we dive into the code. So we won't be doing any of that today. We're doing just straight up HTML today of like, how do I get things to show up in my web browser, right? And then next week, we'll start layering in, okay, how do I use CSS to style everything on that page? How do I change colors? How do I get space between them? And then once we get that mastered, we're going to layer in Bootstrap. And Bootstrap has a grid system built into it that is based off of that 12 system. And that's when we are able to start going back to our portfolio and saying, what elements can I use in Bootstrap, like the grid, in order to start building out my portfolio and getting buttons to show up and having them styled and having my layout right and spacing things out from there. So it will start to make sense. I wouldn't worry too much about understanding the grid. If you just start to layer in your portfolio design thinking about the grid of, hey, I always want to make sure that whatever element I'm creating lines up within those white columns, right? Or those pink columns, whatever they are. And if you're able to just have them lay out properly, when you get into the code, you might have this light bulb moment of, oh, I understand why we designed around the grid, because when we go to implement that code-wise, it will be easier to make my content lay out the way I want it to. Any other question?
I got a question about the grid still, sort of, kind of. So
Sure.
when you line it, you know how it has white space on both ends, so before the pink starts?
Yes.
I kind of asked this last night, but just want to be reassured. So when we resize it, are we going to line the very edge of the white part with the edge of the box that we're putting it in, or will we line the edge of the pink part with the box that we're putting it in?
Ideally, you would have a little bit of pink lining up with the outer edge of the box, because the thinking there is that there will be a little bit of padding around your entire browser window where there won't be content. So the pink should go right up to the edge of the box and not be hanging out over the box. But because we're not doing pixel perfect mockups here, we're just doing enough to like get the concept of what the site should look like. You don't have to worry too much about things lining up exactly, as long as you've got the idea of like, oh, this content looks like it's spanning 6 columns. So when I go into my code, I'm going to make that col 6. But that will make more sense as we get into it. And as we start working on our code, you may find yourself going back into your mockups or your wireframes and adjusting them before you start coding them out. And that's also completely fine.
Thank you.
Any other questions? And remote, feel free to chime in as well. If you've got a question remotely, feel free to unmute and just jump in.
I have a question, and I apologize if I'm over this already. For the assignment, it states like there are specific requirements where you have to include your link for social media. Now, if the website that you're fashioning your mockup after doesn't have those social media links, do you include them in there still?
Yeah, so you should find a way to put them somewhere in your wireframe. And so even if the website you're modeling off of doesn't have them, it should be pretty easy for you to find some spot somewhere in the design to include them. Whether that's in the content section, whether that's in the about section, just finding some place to put them. And they don't have to necessarily say like the word Twitter and show up as a link. You could use the little Twitter icon. LinkedIn is the only major one where you should absolutely have a link to your LinkedIn. But you should just find a way to incorporate them somewhere into the design.
Okay, one more question.
Yep.
Does the link as an active, or is it just a representation of the link?
It won't be active in your mockup or your wireframe. It will be active in your portfolio site, but we won't be publishing your portfolio site until like week 6, right? So anything that once we start coding this out, you don't have to worry about it like going live to the internet because we won't be doing that until later on. But in your mockups and wireframes, those links tend to not be active. They tend to just be representations of what will be the link.
All right, thank you.
No problem. And if any other questions come up, I'm available on Slack. Feel free to reach out to me over the weekend when things pop up. This is also our first cohort using Canvas, right? So if things come up and you're like, this isn't working, like the due date is Sunday, I'm worried about, don't worry, we have no penalties for missing due dates. It's probably something that I did wrong in Canvas. So we'll spend a couple minutes at the end of class just running through all the assignments. And I'll just do a quick 30-second overview of all of them, and you guys can just interrupt me if there are any questions. I know there are a lot of them, but the only major one that you have for this weekend is getting your wireframes complete for your portfolio site and getting them uploaded along with the link of what you would like to model it off of. Because what I'll do is, starting on Monday, go through all of your submissions and just take a look at what you're modeling them off of. So when you have a question of how do I code this out? I don't understand, how I'm going to get this spaced out, or how do I get this over here? Or, how is this going to work on a phone size screen, or whatever it is? At least I'll have a little context off of what you would like the end result to look like. And I think you'll have a good laugh at the end of today at how bad your HTML looks compared to the perfection of the site that you're kind of modeling it off of. But the good news is we have several weeks to kind of layer up those HTML skills, those CSS skills, and really polish off that site to get it to look exactly the way you want. Okay. Last chance for any other questions. So the winning vote for office hours was 5:30 to 6:30 tomorrow on Friday, April 1st. We will be meeting in this link. Please try to be on time because we will only have an hour there. Attendance is completely optional, and you have to bring questions or be ready to like listen to me answer other people's questions, right? It's totally, I have got no content planned for you guys. I just sit here and I wait for questions to come in, and office hours tend to be the good times to ask the tangential questions of, well, based off of what we learned in class, like I didn't want to derail all of class, but I was curious about, that's a great use of office hours. Another great use of office hours is like, I'm working on this part in my wireframes. I'm stuck in diagrams.net. I can't get it to do this one thing. Can I share my screen and work through that with you? So they are group office hours, but we have found whoever attends tends to benefit off of each other's questions. So office hours, feel free to attend. The same Zoom link that we've been using for all the other classes. I am not sure if Calendly sent out an invite based off of the poll that you guys answered, because I picked that time for today. But we'll get in the habit of sending that poll out every Monday. And then we can just slide office hours based off of your availability from there. They will tend to be either Friday evening, Sunday or Saturday or Sunday morning, or early afternoon on Saturday or Sunday. But those tend to be where my availabilities are. And if we go over an hour, that's completely fine. But it's just an opportunity as things start chugging up technically to have time just solely devoted to questions. Okay, any questions on office hours? Oh, and they will be recorded and they will be posted to YouTube. So if you can't make them, you can always tune in on that. Podcast style, to exit, whatever is easiest for you. But there's nothing that we'll be covering on tomorrow evening that if you miss it and you come in on Monday, it's not going to be a big deal. We're not covering any new material there. Okie doke. I'm going to kick off this video about the software development lifecycle. I'm going to pause recording. Okay, so SDLC. This is where I start getting really excited about teaching, not because my whole day is spent in the software development lifecycle, right? And while it seems super boring and like, oh, those 7 steps are so defined, the thing is that features and software will often be at different stages of the software development lifecycle as you're working on it, right? You may be working on one particular feature that's in testing, it's just about ready to go, it's just about ready to be deployed, and right as you're finishing that up, you've got a new feature coming in where you need to start doing the planning for it and figuring out the requirements and who's involved in that feature. And other members of your team may be working on features at other parts of the software development lifecycle. So if you go into small companies, sometimes they don't even have the stages of the SDLC defined, right? But oftentimes these stages just naturally happen. Some companies may cut out the testing step, which they really shouldn't, right? But sometimes companies go, well, we only have a couple developers. You're also in charge of the deployment of it, right? And so some of these steps get done by the same people, but at the end of the day, some version of these steps get done for every feature or every piece of software that gets shipped out. So I'm hoping that if we look at our outline, hopefully you're looking at this and going, well, we've done planning, right? The planning was, the car needs to be easy to use. The car is going to primarily operate off a touch screen. I need to understand, do I need to drive from the touch screen? Do the seat controls get included in there? That's all planning. The next step he called requirement analysis. I like to consider that engineering breakdown, right? That's, hey, let's get the product owner out of the way. Let's get the customer out of the way. Let's start thinking about all the information we gathered and start getting them into user manageable tasks. The touchscreen needs to be able to control the seat heaters. Okay, if it needs to control the seat heaters, what details do we need to know about that? There's a passenger seat heater and a driver seat heater. We need to make sure that we have that documented in the requirements somewhere, right? So requirement analysis is really, it sounds similar to planning, but the way I like to split that is planning is getting the big picture, and then the requirement analysis is kind of seeing the trees throughout the forest, right? It's seeing what all the individual things are that need to get done. From there, we move into design. And design is kind of tricky because it's not only just user interface design, it's also architecture design, database design, it's technical requirements planning in terms of what language are we doing this in, what frameworks are we doing this in. I know he threw a lot of things in this phase, but this design phase is basically what can we do to prep before engineers start writing code, right? And because that development phase takes so long, the design phase that comes right before it is super important, right? Of what do we need to do to prepare before the engineers, who are often the most expensive part of a project, get their hands into this and start writing out code. So that's not just UI design, that's also figuring out servers and cost for servers. That's understanding what data is going to be stored in the database, what kind of database we're using, what kind of tech stack we're using, all of that fun stuff. Then we get into development, and believe it or not, development is probably the easiest part of this life cycle, because if you have done your requirement analysis and design to a T, the development just becomes a long list of everything that needs to get done, right? And we're going to talk about Kanban just in a minute, about how easy it is to lose track of not only what you're working on, but also what the whole team is working on. And if you have a good project manager, that should be less of a concern. But it is super important to stay on top of the development throughout the whole process, especially when we aren't looking at this linearly, right? Because it's a cycle, but it's a cycle for every individual piece. And there are oftentimes you'll be working on a project where the design is done for one aspect of it, or the requirements analysis is done, but not for others, right? And so this cycle may be happening at several different stages. And so that's why it's so important to be able to track everything that's going on. And that's really the job of the project manager, but also you as a developer, right? The project manager can't do their job unless you're reporting status out to them. And so that will be something that we'll have throughout your capstone work and our class project work. You'll be reporting out to me with bi-weekly one-on-ones, which is one of your homework assignments for this weekend, is schedule your first one-on-ones. But I will be acting essentially as your project manager and saying, hey, did you forget about this task? Where are you stuck? Where are you spending more time than you thought you would, right? Let's make sure that you've got everything coming up on your radar, and also, probably more importantly, that things aren't falling off your radar. So that's a really hard thing to teach, but it's a really easy thing to experience, right? And so that's why we take this approach throughout our capstones, which we don't start for another couple weeks, just to get your feet wet, get you going in development. And once you guys have enough knowledge to really make headway in your capstone, that's when we drop the capstone on you and say, here are the requirements of the capstone. Go through everything that you've learned in week 1. Go do your project planning. Go do a Trello board and Kanban. Go get all of that set up, right? So that's what's coming up. Anyway, tangent there. Back to the SDLC. Testing is always very, very important. It's also important that not just the developer is doing the testing, but either another developer or another member of your team. That is typically called QA, for quality assurance. And they have full-time roles set up for just going into QA. And often you can get into the tech industry by starting in QA and working your way up to a career as a developer. But quality assurance, super, super important. In smaller companies, the person doing the QA may be the product owner, right? It may be the customer saying, let me go use this, let me go try this out before we release it to production. And so oftentimes you'll have at least 3 development environments. You'll have your local dev environment, which is running on your computer, and any changes you make aren't impacting anyone. Then you'll have a staging environment, which is a place where you can ship up your code and say, hey, this may not be ready to ship out yet, but at least you can play around with it and test it here. And then you've got your production environment, which means, hey, this is past QA, this is past all testing, we're going to deploy this out to our customers, and that will be production. Now, those 3 environments are the most common ones. However, you can add more to them. Some teams are set up for QA, so QA has their own server so that when QA is playing around with things, they're not breaking something that they're going to show to a customer in staging, and they're definitely not breaking anything in production when they're testing out a new version. And so why that's super important is QA may be testing, and they go into the users and they try to delete a user, and all of a sudden they find a bug where when they try to delete one user, every user gets deleted in the database. And you go, whoops, that's a bug, we got to go fix that. Well, if they're testing on production, they accidentally just deleted all the users, right? So that's why environments are so important, is that they are clear lines of delineation. So when you do something wrong and break something terribly in one environment, as long as it's not production, it's not going to impact anyone else. And so when we get into DevOps, probably not in the first week, but more in the second week of DevOps, which comes like 3/4 the way through the program, we'll be talking about different environments and why they're important and how to set them up and all of that stuff. But the basic concept there is that, you know, it's important to test, and when you test, it's important to consider the whole environment that you're testing in to make sure it won't impact other people. Okay, last 2 steps of the process. Integration, I like to think about that as deployment. That's all right, everything has cleared, this feature is ready to go, we've thoroughly thought it through, we have designed around it, we've made the feature work in development, we've gotten through QA and testing, we know this feature isn't going to break things. Let's get to integration or deployment. That's typically when DevOps gets involved, although DevOps should be involved in the requirement analysis and design phase as well. So they're not surprised, right? Before we start coding as developers, we want to make sure that DevOps is set up to deploy whatever we are building. But we get to integration and deployment. Database engineers get involved at this point. Backend server managers. Some teams have specific cloud teams. But this is about, hey, how do we review this to make sure that it will scale? Because right now we've only had 10 people or 25 people using the system, but when we deploy this is going to go out to thousands of people, right? Or sometimes millions of people. So the integration and deployment teams are all about making sure that scales. And sometimes when you think a feature is good to go and it's past QA and it hits the deployment team or the DevOps team, and they flag it and send it back to you and they go, this isn't going to work, this is too resource intensive, we've got to engineer a better solution for this. So at any point in this process, it can actually go backwards. If you're doing it right, it shouldn't, but there are definitely times where we have to take a step back in this life cycle and change it to make sure that we're planning all the way through. And then finally, you get to maintenance, right? Because software is never ship it and forget it. There will always be maintenance of, oh, we're upgrading this framework, and because the framework has changed, this feature needs to change. Or, oh, this customer is emailing in and this feature has worked great for 4 years and suddenly it's not working. We need to go figure out why. And maintenance can also be planning for the next version of it, right? Receiving user feedback, figuring out what steps need to come next. And the most important thing of this is that this life cycle is in a circle, right? In the diagram that he had, that last arrow that he drew is the most important. That we will go back into planning, we'll start this all over again, and we'll start adding new features and planning for them and understanding the requirements and developing them out and designing them, right? All of that kind of stuff. Okay, take a moment there. What do you guys think about SDLC? Any questions there? Have you observed SDLC happening at any companies? Are you surprised there's so many steps? Any comments are welcome.
I hear my soon-to-be stepdaughter talk about that in her work.
I think it's very common. Like I'm not even technical yet, and those are the type of like fundamentals that we use in my job.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very common, and I think it's one of those things that, like I said, some companies do it and don't even realize that it's called the SDLC, or, are able to identify all of those steps. But I do think bigger organizations will look at their SDLC and say, hey, what are we doing well, and kind of back their budget out from there. Okay. Yep, go ahead.
In the life cycle, when it talks about how there's maintenance of the website that's created, is that always included in like the package to where the company who's the originator of the software also has to maintain it, and so would that like later be a dedicated team going forward, or do they hire an outside company?
Great question. Yes, all of the above. Oftentimes a company will not sign a contract unless it has a maintenance section in it, right? A company that has dealt with software providers before hopefully will understand that that maintenance is a required part of software, and no matter how well that software is built and planned and developed and tested, there will always be pieces of software that need maintenance in terms of updates, in terms of bugs, in terms of, right? Software is a living, breathing thing, and it is possible for software to die. And sometimes companies decide to do that because the maintenance is too much. Sometimes software companies will pull the plug because they're working on a completely new version. Sometimes software companies will do that because they haven't been keeping up with the maintenance and really need to. But it is also possible. There are a lot of different pricing models out there, right? So some software companies are open source, meaning they give their software away for free, and then they charge for the maintenance aspect alone. So they will say, hey, you can use our software, you can install it, you can do whatever you would like with it for completely for free. But if you would like to have the experts who built this software have them on call for support and upgrades, and when you get stuck, you can pay us for a support contract or a maintenance contract and get our support. Other open source companies will also do that with features, right? They'll say, hey, here's our base software. It's available for everyone. But if you have this one custom feature that you need to plug into our software, you can hire us and we will go through the SDLC with you and add that one particular feature in as a custom feature just for your company. So there are a lot of different pricing models. Maintenance is not necessarily always included in the contract. Sometimes there's a time limit with it. So they'll say, hey, you'll buy our software, we'll give you a year of maintenance with it. And then if you would like to renew the maintenance contract, you can at a much lower rate. Some companies will pair their updates with the maintenance and say, hey, we'll give you free updates as they come up, as long as you're paying for maintenance. But as soon as you stop paying for maintenance, those updates get cut off. So if your computer upgrades, your operating system upgrades, and that software no longer works, that's on you unless you renew a support contract. So it's definitely something that gets underestimated by a lot of software developers getting started in the industry, because they think they're done once the software is off to the customer. And so that's definitely something to factor in if you start doing any freelance work, of figuring out what does the maintenance look like on this. And a lot of developers will say it's just hourly, right? Some people will do a retainer and say, hey, you've got to pay me $100 a month just to have on-call access to me. And then if something breaks, it's $50 or $100 an hour for me to go fix it. And sometimes those fixes are 15 minutes. Sometimes they're a couple hours. Sometimes it breaks because of, a bug that you found in the code that didn't get found in testing. Sometimes it breaks because external factors, the operating system got updated, or some dependency, or there's a security vulnerability. And sometimes it breaks because the customer. I can't tell you how many websites I've worked on where the customer's gone in and thought they were as good as me and made updates to the site, and then come back to me with their tail between their legs and say, well, I tried to do this on my own and it just doesn't look right. Can you please fix it? And oftentimes it takes more time to fix it than it does if I had just done it for them in the first place. So it is really wide variance there in terms of what maintenance looks like. But it's definitely the most underestimated or forgotten part of the software development lifecycle that can come back to bite you the most. Okay, any questions on that? Also, hopefully that gives you just a little bit more insight into what this looks like. And hopefully you're starting to think back over the past 3.5 days of what have we been planning and doing the requirements for and starting the design of. And hopefully you're starting to see, hey, this starts snowballing, right? We start picking up speed on this. And because we've done those initial steps properly, we're able to go into development just set up for success. Which development is often the hardest part to do, but if we do the planning right, it becomes much easier. Okay, with all of that said, there's a lot going on in that software development lifecycle, so we're going to take a moment to talk about Kanban. And when I say talk, I mean watch another video. There we go, sorry. So Atlassian is one of the biggest names in the project management space. They make a software called Jira, Jira, that is used for bug tracking and ticketing and project management. It's definitely the biggest software used out there, although there are lots of alternatives. And that is a great question to ask when you're interviewing for a job, right? Of, hey, what project management software do you use and what's your typical project management flow look like? Because that's going to impact your day-to-day, right? That is what is controlling what you are working on and how it's being tracked and making sure that you're set up for not only your own success, but success in your team. And so project management, super interesting. We're going to actually dive into a tool called Trello. We're going to get it set up in the next 20 minutes, and then we'll go on break. But the nice thing about Kanban, and just to reiterate on this, Kanban is meant to adapt to your flow, right? And so in his board, what he had set up was backlog, today, doing, done, and block, right? And every team works a little differently. Some teams will say, we don't have a backlog, we just have a to-do, right? And that's a very long list, and we just sort that out. And based off of what priority it is, when someone's ready for a new task, they can automatically go to that to-do list, pull it into doing, and get going. There are other teams that will come in and say, well, no, we're going to have a separate backlog list, and then we're going to have a this sprint list. And we're going to go through the backlog every 2 weeks and pull over things that we think that we can get done in these 2 weeks. That is called sprints and agile. But the nice thing about the Kanban board is that it's flexible enough that you can set it up however you want. If you find that you have tasks or cards that are in a different status, you can always create a new list for that. And if you find yourself, saying, hey, there are too many things here, I'm getting lost, this system isn't working for me, you can adjust to that. So Trello was built as a tool specifically for Kanban, but factoring in all of that flexibility. And so I'm actually going to try to pull up, I'll show you after break. Oh, I have to sign in anyway. I'm going to pull up what the Hack Upstate Trello board looks like, and that's actually how Jesse and Max G and I and Jason all coordinate on what tasks are getting done, what needs to get done, having individual conversations on those cards, all while we're working completely asynchronously and completely remotely, right? So it's a really flexible system, and just give me 1 second because I am not signed into Trello. I have a different user account that I use for class to make sure I don't accidentally share something that's like work intellectual property, which is a whole nother topic we could get into. But I just need to sign in to my Atlassian account. Any questions about that video while I'm stalling and trying to sign in?
I have a question. Is Trello sort of kind of like Asana?
Trello is exactly like Asana. Asana is a direct competitor to Jira and to, there are a ton of project management tools out there, but Asana is definitely one of the other big ones in the space. So we're going to go through in just a moment and set up, we're going to set up our own Trello board from scratch, but I just want to make sure that I can share a board that's not going to share too much information. Okay, yeah. So our Trello boards, you can see, get pretty involved pretty quickly, but we basically have recurring tasks in here, our backlog of tasks, what we're going to tackle this sprint, what we're working on today, what is currently in progress, or what's in progress that someone else is working on, what are we waiting for on QA, what, do we have things that need to be reviewed, and then we've got our done list and our canceled list as well. And so this is things all the way down to, hey, let's make sure that Jesse has shared latch access so that I can get into the space and that we have a door code and we can track all of that, right? Let's make sure that the laptop tracking software is installed. And we've got that down to due dates, right? So we've got links in here, we've got our due dates, we have members on this card, and then we've got it tracked of what phase is this labeled into, right? So we can come down here and we've got entire tracking steps of, hey, has the order been placed? Have we figured out the final number? Has it shipped? Did we, come up with tracking numbers for all of that? Down to comments, right? Where I can tag Jesse and say, hey, the order's placed, here's when it's coming in. Jesse can say, hey, here's the timeline, and we can have a whole conversation on this. But we can also keep it contextual, which is the important thing, right? So it's not like, because Jesse and I are working on 30 different things all at once. So when we're having a conversation on this one particular card, we can track what that conversation is actually about. So before I dive in, any questions on this?
I currently have a Trello with my personal email that I use and stuff for you guys for. Would I have to make a separate one, or could I make a different board? Or
you can make a different board. We are going to go through together and make a board for the portfolio page that I created just to get you started. And then your homework for this weekend will be to create your own board. If it's on an existing account, that's completely fine, and accounts are free. You're going to create a new board. You're going to add me to it so I can see that you've created the board. And then we're going to just create cards for different parts of the portfolio website. We're not in a position yet to act on those cards, right, and start building out those features. But we are in a position to start planning out that website and starting to make sure that we've got everything covered. So we're going to dive into that shortly. Find to use your current account. And Karen asked a great question when I shared the outline with her today. She said, do they have to use Trello? And the answer to that is no. That's the tool that I'm going to be showing in class. But if you use a different project management tool, if you're an Asana wizard and you would like to set up Kanban in Asana, that is also completely fine. The only requirement is that it is something Kanban based, because that's what we'll be using for tracking capstone progress and making sure that everything's on your radar. But I happen to know a couple successful companies that were struggling because they did not have project management underway, and they were trying to accomplish too much, right? They were trying to go right into Agile and go into sprints, and there wasn't communication between the teams. And what ended up getting that company going was Post-it notes. They went over to a wall and they took painter's tape and they split it up and they said, to do, doing, done, right? This is all that we have. And anytime that it's a yellow Post-it, it's going to be the CEO that's working on something. Anytime it's a pink Post-it, it's going to be the CTO. And anytime it's a blue Post-it, it's going to be the operations person, right? And they wrote all of their tasks out and did to do, doing, done, and just had that on the wall. And I can't tell you how many pictures they ended up taking of that so that they could go home and work on things outside of the office. But what it did is it helped them identify bottlenecks, because they said, whoa, we've got 40 things in doing. We can't possibly be doing 40 things at once. We need to limit this down. And we need to say, hey, we need a new column here for backlog or for roadblock. We need a place so that when we start doing something and get a couple hours into it and can't keep working on it because we're waiting on someone else, we need to move this to a different status. Because otherwise, when we get unroadblocked by it, we're going to lose track of it because we were doing it and forgot that we were doing it and forgot that we were waiting on feedback for it. So let's take that and put that in a roadblock column. And whenever I finish something in the doing, I'm going to move it over to my done, and then I'm going to go look at my roadblock, because I can't go take something else out of the to-do list, even though I've got capacity to work on something new. I need to reassess all of my color cards in the roadblock and make sure I'm still roadblocked on all of them. If I'm not, I need to go take that roadblock card, put that back in my doing, and go finish that task, or do enough of it until I'm roadblocked again, and then move it back into that roadblock column. Because that's not only helping the person get that task done, it's also helping the person understand, here's where I'm held up, and for other team members to look at that roadblock column and say, oh, I'm blocking you on that. I need to go through and answer you before I'm able to move on. It seems like such a simple system, but you will be shocked at how helpful it is in not only understanding what you're currently working on, but what you got stuck working on and where you need the additional help. Because you may have a one-on-one scheduled with me. You may have a one-on-one on Monday, get stuck on an issue on Tuesday, and be like, this is one of those issues we can't answer it over Slack. I just have to wait for my next one-on-one. And that may not be for another week, right? And so when another week rolls around and you come into the one-on-one, you're going to have a couple things stacked up and forget that you were stuck on this issue a week ago. And that's incredibly frustrating, right? And so tracking all of that in a system is super important. So I know people who do this on whiteboards. I don't like the whiteboard approach myself because you have to rewrite things as you move them to different columns. I have seen people list all of their things that they're working out on a whiteboard and then just write the status next to them, kind of inverting the Kanban method, if that makes sense at all. That's completely fine. I know some people who hate learning new tools and just want to use spreadsheets, because spreadsheets and conditional formatting and tables and borders and shading are their jam. That's completely fine as well. And data validation, if you would like to track all of this in a spreadsheet, by all means track all of this in a spreadsheet. We're going to show you Trello. I can encourage you to use Trello because I love Trello, but just because I love a tool does not mean that I should be forcing you guys to use that tool. So if you find that you've got a notebook and you're using Post-it notes and tracking everything in that notebook, just take a picture of the notebook when you're done with a portfolio site and the assignment will be complete for me. You do not have to use a digital tool for this. Hopefully I've presented a couple other options, but whatever system works for you is going to be just key to understand and get in place by the end of week 1, because I'm telling you, we're going to start moving fast on this. And once we get into your capstone, once we get into the portfolio, you're gonna have to balance getting project work and homework work done with learning how to actually pull off the project. And that's a tough thing to balance, and why the project management will become so important. Okay, any questions on that?
One question is, how do you determine the scope of a task? Like I know I wouldn't just say build portfolio site as a task. So like, how do you break it into chunks?
Great question. So what I like to do is, my general rule of thumb is, it's too big of a task if you can't get it done in a day. So and that's just my rule of thumb. I have heard some people say it's too big of a task if you can't get it done in 2 hours. I have heard some people say it's too big of a task if you can't get it done in a week. So it really depends on your system. But what I like to do is, I like to say, hey, 4 to 8 hours is my ideal card range. So a task and a card are two separate things, right? A task is, I need to make sure all the links in my nav bar are showing up, and then I also need to make sure that the links are actually taking me to the right place. I would make that 2 separate tasks, but all in one nav bar card. And even though that nav bar I may be able to get done in an hour or 2 hours, it's a logical work grouping. And it's a logical work grouping because I can get everything done in that task list and make sure that everything is complete before I go on and move to the next section. So we're actually going to go through the portfolio site that I pulled up yesterday, and I'm going to make cards for everything, and then I'm going to start breaking them down into the individual task list. That's the system that works for me. That's the system that I'm going to model, but that system may not work for you. You may say, hey, what I would like to do is get all of the HTML laid out first, and it's going to be really ugly, and then I'm going to go back and do all the styling, and then I'm going to go back and do all the images. I don't know a lot of developers that work that way, but I've worked with a couple of them, and while it seems like a really weird way to do it to me, they get the work done. And so, at the end of the day, what do I really care if they're able to get that work done? So there are different ways of approaching this, but that's my general rule of thumb. Of 4 to 8 hours is the maximum amount of time that you can do in a task, in a card, and the minimum time doesn't matter quite as much, right? Because if there's something where you go, oh, you know what, I've got to send that email off to Max and just let him know I'm going to be missing class, but I don't have time to do it now. Let me just make a quick card for that so I don't forget about it. Even though it's only going to take 10 or 15 minutes, it's still worthwhile creating the card for that so it doesn't fall off your radar, right? The whole point of the Kanban here is to fit into your existing workflow, or to think through your workflow as you're starting a new one to make sure that you've got everything planned out. Make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask everyone, go to Trello.com if you would like to follow along. If you don't want to follow along and you have your own project management system that you would like to try, I would either encourage you to sign into that now, or pull out your notebook and just start making your columns at the top of your backlog, this week, doing, or today. And then your done columns. But if you get to Trello and you get to a screen that looks like this, where you've got a create button up at the top and you can see different boards, then you are good to go and you can start on break. And if you already have an account, just sign in. You don't have to create a new board yet. We'll take care of that after break, but just get to this point if you would like to follow along. Again, completely optional.
Max, you mentioned earlier that we have to invite you to the board.
Yes.
What email address?
If you just type in Max Matthews, that is my username. Just make sure you got 2 T's and all one word, no space. And that should like pop up my profile and my profile picture to confirm that it's actually me. But I'll go through that step once we create the board after break. So if you're having any issues with it, that's also fine.
What are you doing?
Caitlin's here. That's why I'm asking what you're doing.
Everyone is creating a Trello account or signing into a project management system that they prefer to use, or pulling out a piece of paper and just getting their Kanban pages set up. Okay. So I'm going to say, let's start break, be back at 7:20. And if you're having any troubles getting into Trello or creating an account or anything, I'll stick around for a couple minutes so you guys can ask questions. And that goes for anyone who's remote as well.
They were on earlier. I tried once or twice. Yeah,
nothing.
I'm like,
but maybe no. Yeah,
so like this is the room. When we're done, the tables go in a straight line here. I just take this one turn.
Wait, what? Oh, going up that way? Like a big table in the middle, basically?
Yeah, so like all these tables, they just go in line. So they just come back in and go on a line. So you can say, and these go up and down. This one stays right where it is. That one I turn and put it in front of the TV.
And then question for you guys of deciding whether you want to go through the move so you can actually see things, or if you're fine in the dark, it doesn't bother me at all. So for you guys to decide.
After break to a different room, or do you want to just stay here? So they want to stay here.
Fine with me. Doesn't matter to me at all. Is the temperature a little bit better today, or is it still hot?
Perfect.
Good. We're trying to make improvements.
It's what?
Next.
Yeah.
What time is break over?
7:20.
Oh, okay, thank you.
No problem.
And the charger and the mouse. I don't know, because when you're sitting here and you're trying to do something with it, you can't see it, you can't reach it, and it's a bit.
Yeah.
So I have that mouse. That's my laptop.
Oh.
So the mouse controls this
Okay.
laptop and the screen here.
You gotta take a picture of the setup.
No, you can know how to do it.
Well, I gotta know what's connected to what. So like this to the TV,
This
and then
is to the TV.
that's
This is
also to the TV.
the camera. It's up here.
What camera? Okay.
Yeah.
That's what I mean. Like I gotta like.
Oh yeah, no, you just plug them in. Boom, boom.
So we're going to do a quick overview of creating a board in Trello, getting your, they call them lists or columns set up, creating cards, and kind of just talking through that example website of what cards I would create for that. We might do just one other section just so you get the feel of it. And then I'm going to stop everything and we're going to have some fun in the terminal and get started there. So let me share my screen. I'm going to go back to Trello, and I'll also cover how to add me to the board as well. So I'm going to share screen. So your Trello should look something like this when you sign in. They may create a board for you to get started. It's fine to use that. I'm already seeing some of the students starting to share their workspaces with me, which is great. I'm going to go up to Create Board up here and click on Create Board. and you can pick whatever color or template you'd want. And the board title, I'm just going to call it Max's portfolio site. And I'm going to make sure I'm going to create it in my Trello workspace. And you should also create it in your own workspace. And then it's fine to leave this setting on workspace. Or if you want to share it with other students or other people, you can make it public, and then only everyone would be able to see it, but only members added to it would be able to edit it. So I'm going to hit create there. And it has already created to-do, doing, done for me. However, that's not the system I like to use. I like to have a backlog. And the backlog is anything that's going to get done in the next week or 2 weeks, depending on how your state of mind's working. Because this boot camp is so weekly based, I would actually make anything that's not going to get done this week, but I don't want to forget about doing, that's what my backlog is going to do. Is going to have all of those cards in it. Now, I'm going to have, instead of my to-do, I'm going to rename this to-do this week, just so I have context of separating out the backlog of things to get to eventually with my to-do, which is, hey, this is my weekly thing. And every Monday morning or every Friday afternoon or whatever time you want to pick, I try and schedule a regular time to go through and say, I should be updating this throughout the week, but let me just sit down and do a quick recap, right? Which is also sometimes called a post-mortem or a retrospective. So let me do a retrospective. What did I get done this week? What did I think I was going to get done and not get done this week? What took more time than I thought? Where did I get roadblocked that I didn't think I was going to get roadblocked? And sometimes it's helpful to do this right in a blog post, right? If you want to blog about this and say, here's my project rundown retrospective, that may be a really interesting thing to share. If you're a journaler, feel free to journal about it. You don't have to document this, right? But I do think it is valuable to go back and just spend a couple minutes with just you and your board, right? And figure out what you got done, what progress you made, and kind of just thinking through that whole week, that whole sprint. Okay, so backlog to do, my doing, I try to limit things in my doing to like 3 cards maximum. Ideally, you only have one thing in your doing, and the other thing I like to do is have an in progress. And the reason I have an in progress is sometimes I start on things and I'm not actively doing them, but at the same time, I don't want it to go back into my to-do list because I've already started on it. This goes back to personal preference. I know a lot of people who say then just leave it in your doing and have a couple things in your doing. Don't have a separate in progress column. I like having them separate, but it depends on the project. So it's up to you whether you want to keep your doing as everything in progress, or you want your doing to be the one task that you're focusing on, and whatever things that you have already started but haven't completed move into a different list. And then I have my done column, and this is basically my whole board, right? Hey, what are the backlog things? And sometimes I'll just throw backlog notes in there and not flesh them out. But whenever they get to my to-do this week list, I need to go in and make sure each individual task is set up in a list. So before yep, go ahead, question.
Which one did you say that you try to keep a maximum of 3 cards in?
I try, if you're combining your doing and your in progress list, that's what I try to never have more than 3 things in. If you're separating them out, I would say never have more than 1 thing in your doing, and everything else should go into your in progress, and that's what you should try and cap as 3.
Okay, thank you.
Totally personal preference there. So up at the top, there should be a little blue invite button, and that's what you need to add me. Okay, So up here at the top, there's a little invite button. Hopefully me clicking on this is not going to crash Zoom again. Okay, great. And then it should say email address or name. If you type in Max Matthews, it should pop up with my little profile picture. If you click on that, I can't because I'm obviously myself. And then click on the send invitation down here at the bottom. That should let me get in. The other way you can do it is if you hit a little create link button, you can copy this and paste it into either the Canvas assignment, or you can just Slack it to me directly. But the easiest way to get me in is just type in Max Matthews, all lowercase, and with 2 T's. And that should let me get into the board so we can track progress once we get this project kicked off coding-wise. Okay. I'm going to pull over my resume website, and I'm going to start breaking this down structurally, right? So we've done a little bit of a requirements planning doc for this, and you can also source your content from there for project planning. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at this, and I'm going to say, hey, there are 2 sections on the screen right now. I've got my nav bar, and I've got like my home page, right? And I think he calls this the about section. So I'm going to just use the links in the nav bar to start my planning. So I'm not going to start doing them this week, right? I need to learn HTML first. I need to get my CSS under control. I need a little bit of Bootstrap experience. We're not going to be able to do this project yet. But what I am working on is, and I have already started them, but I'm not actively doing it. So what I'm going to do is actually create an in-progress card for my wireframes. And in my wireframes, I'm going to come in here and actually go to my day 3 outline and pull up my requirements doc and just grab the link for that, go back to my Trello, so I'm centralizing my resources, and in the description, I'm going to say, make sure my wireframes include all of the requirements here. And I'm going to save that in. And now that shows up as a link, and I can just jump into that. And you can see it did a nice Google Docs thing and just formatted it for me so it wasn't the big link, which is nice. And I also am going to put a date on here because that is due the 3rd, and I can even set up a reminder for Saturday to remind me. I'm actually not going to have the reminder, but I'm going to put that in there so it's in there. And there's even a calendar view, so if you go into your calendar and look on April 3rd, my wireframes card is there. But I'm going to get back to my board, and I'm going to come in, and I've got my wireframes card there. It's in progress. The other thing that I like to do is create a card for my project planning, because my project planning takes a lot of time, and I want to acknowledge that I'm doing that because I want to look back at this and say, oh, you know what? I was in the middle of doing that in class, and if I come into this board tomorrow, I want to remember that I didn't finish planning out all of these individual things, and that's why it's still in doing. So I'm actually going to come in here, and I'm going to say Trello card creation. And that way I know, hey, I'm working on it. I don't need a due date on that. I don't need any notes on there. If I wanted to leave notes, I could. And if I were working in a group project, I could come over to members and add additional people onto this if I were, for example, waiting for them to create their cards on this board. Okay, so I've got my doing. And you know what? I did realize I forgot one one list, I'm sorry, and that's my roadblock. Right? That's things that I'm stuck on that I need someone else's help with. And so I can add that in over there. Okay. To do, doing, done, roadblocked. I like switching these. So my roadblocked is a little bit more visible. Because when things get to done, yeah, it's great to review them in my retrospective. But for my roadblocked, I really want to keep an eye on them and make sure that if something is roadblocked and I haven't heard back from someone in a while, I can go back into that list and check. Okay, Trello card creation. I've got my wireframes in progress. And now I'm going to start loading up my backlog. So I'm going to say my nav bar is one of the things that I need. And in my nav bar, I'm going to create a new checklist. And I'm just going to add that. And the things in my checklist, I need to get my profile image loaded. Add profile image. I need to add links for about, experience, education. And if you're changing things in from your example site and you want to work off of your wireframe for your card creation instead of working off of your example site, that's also completely fine. Because the goal is for the example site and your wireframes to kind of be similar, if your wireframes are more accurate, go ahead and just work off of your wireframes here. Education skills. Now, in addition to adding the links, I want to, and here's where we start thinking about these as tasks instead of overall cards. I need to make sure my links are navigating to the correct sections on the page. And that's another thing that I may want to tweak, right? The way this site is set up is if I click on skills, it kind of scrolls me down over here. But what I may want to do is put each one of these on separate pages and have it navigate me. And in fact, I think that's something I do want to do. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to come back in here, click on it to edit it, and say, make sure my links are navigating to the correct page. And that way, I'll have it noted, okay, I want to move on to the next one. Okay, that should kind of take care of my nav bar. I don't have a date for this yet, and that's okay because it's in the backlog. If I were moving this into my to-do this week, I might want to set a date on that just so I've got an idea of, hey, I'm planning this out. I think the nav bar is only going to take me a day to do. So I'm going to start, if this were in the to-do this week, I'm going to start planning that out and saying the nav bar I want to get done by Monday, and then the main section I want to get done by Tuesday. And I can just go in and add dates to that. And while I'm in here, if I'm completing things, I can also check things off. And not only will that give me progress going on here, but I'll also be able to see that 2 out of 3 of them are done in the board itself. So I'm just going to pop in there and I'm going to uncheck those because I don't have them done yet. So I think you guys are getting the idea. I'll just do one more thing for the About section. I'm going to say About, and my tasks in there. I'm going to add my checklist over on the right. And I'm going to say name, address, email, and then email link, correctly opening new email. And then break that out into 2 because getting your email to show up and then getting that link to work, 2 separate things. I'm going to say paragraph about copy. And adding that in may seem trivial, but you may be working on this and say, I'll come back to that. I don't know exactly what paragraph I'm going to write in there. But if you don't have it as a separate sub-item, you may forget to go back and do that. And then I'm going to say add social media icons. And then another one for make social media icons open in new tab. And that's another important one, right? Of starting to think through while you're doing your planning is, hey, I don't want to just click on this and go to my LinkedIn. When I click on this, I want it to open LinkedIn in another tab. So once they're done navigating my LinkedIn, they can close the tab and come back to my website. Okay, we could go through and what you should do is go through once your wireframe is complete and continue making cards on your board that have your checklist items in them. With that said, if you're using another project system, that's also completely fine. If you want to go the Post-it note route and you've got a Post-it note in your home office that you would like to keep everything up to date in there, that is also completely fine. The homework assignment for this weekend is just let me see your project management in progress, right? And if that happens to be in Trello and matches the exact board that I have, great, no problem. If that ends up being the Post-it note system or a whiteboard system or a spreadsheet or Asana or some other project management tool, that is all fine. Just screenshot it or take a picture of it or just show me that you have put some time into thinking through your project management planning, and that homework assignment will be complete. Questions? Sorry, I didn't hear that.
When is this homework assignment due?
Sunday at 11:59 p.m.
And how did you get that about list up again?
Yep, there's a little button for checklist over on the, once you open the card, it will say checklist over here. If you click on that and just say add, it will add a new list in for you. And then you can just click on add an item, and that will let you add in individual things in there.
Wait, when you open, like, what card?
So,
when I open my card, that's not coming up. Like on your add card?
Oh, so when you add a card, you just name it. So you'll name this, contact, and hit enter, and that will create the card. And then if you click on the card, it will open it and give you more details on it.
Okay.
And feel free to get fancy in here if you want to do labeling, if you want to, whatever. We will probably be using Trello throughout the class, just so we can kind of track where we're at and how things are going. And if you end up getting through here and you're like, you know what, I got my own project management flow, I don't need Trello, like, just let me be me and get through the course on my own, that's completely fine. We aren't requiring you use Trello throughout the whole program, but we are hoping that you get into some kind of project management system, even if it's some informal one that, you're managing yourself. So this will be the only check-in that we have for Trello, and then the other check-ins during one-on-ones, we'll just say, like, hey, can you share something with us of where you're at in your capstone progress or in your homework progress or anything like that. But because capstones don't start until a couple weeks from now, that's nothing you need to worry about.
Is Trello, is Notion the same thing as Trello?
Great question. We actually use we use Notion internally at Hack Upstate, just like we use Trello internally at Hack Upstate. Trello is a little bit more full-featured in terms of project management. The way I like to describe Notion is if Google Sheets, Google Docs, and Trello had a baby together. So Notion is really powerful, and you can use Notion instead of using Trello if you want. But Trello tends to be the better tool if the only thing you're looking for in the tool is project management.
I just happened to I just did a search in YouTube so I could watch a Trello video, and then it said Trello versus Notion, and I have Notion for something else, nothing like this, and so I was just curious. I will use Trello.
Yeah, I'm not signed into Notion on this account. Otherwise, I would show it to you. But Notion does have support for Kanbans, and you can track things in it. Like I said, it's not quite as flexible, but they are trying to catch up to Trello. So if you would like to spend some time in Notion and try and create a board in there and play around with it, I would totally encourage you to do that. I love Notion as a tool. For our project management, we still keep things in Trello just because it's a little bit more robust. But for all of our internal documentation and meeting logging, we use Trello as a CRM, a customer resource manager. So Notion is great, and I'm not discouraging it. Customer relationship manager is CRM, sorry. And I love Trello. I love Notion as a tool, but I also love Trello, if that makes any sense. Okay, any questions on Trello or on project management as a whole before we dive into some command line stuff?
You might have covered this, but can you have Trello, can you set it to like send you an email reminder to start something on a date?
Yep. If you go into a card that has a date set on it, if you go into dates, down here at the bottom, it says set due date reminder, and you're able to do that for like a couple minutes before the due date, all the way up until 2 days before the due date.
Okay, and that'll be a reminder to your email address.
Correct. And if you enable notifications, there is a Trello app that you can download, just like the Slack app that you've downloaded. So you can download the Trello app on your mobile phone and on your Mac and get notifications from reminders. But if you don't have notifications set up on either the web app, the desktop app, or the mobile app, you'll get email reminders instead.
Thank you.
No problem. Good question. And they do have a little notifications up here, and so like I'm getting notifications that you guys have added me to all of your boards, but reminders for due dates on cards would also show up in the notifications there. Any other questions on Trello or project management before we move on to actually getting technical and playing around in the terminal?
Nope.
This helpful for you guys?
Yeah.
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
Awesome. Today was the first day where I'm like, oh, I don't know what I'm teaching tonight. And obviously we've got like 2 whole cohorts of other content. And I'm like, all right, how do we strike the balance between like not dumping you into code for week 1, but at the same time getting you so set up for success for project planning and project management that when we do dive into projects, you know, you're ready to hit the ground running. So the balance that I think that the goal was to hit tonight was introduce you to software development lifecycle, make sure you understand those terms, get you going not only in project management concepts, but also hand you a tool that you can start using. And then the kind of the crossover into the technical is starting to work with terminal and understanding basic commands there. So I don't think the prep work had you do too much in terminal, but we're going to start playing around with that tonight. So without further ado, let me pop open my terminal. On the Mac, if you hit Command and Space, it's going to pop open Spotlight Search for you. You can type in any application name there that's installed and hit Enter, and it will automatically open that application for you. So I just hit Command Space and typed in the word terminal and hit Enter, and that opened terminal for me. The other way you can get to it is either from Launchpad or your applications folder. If you go down to the utilities folder in applications, you can also launch terminal that way. So everyone should pop open their terminal, and you feel free to follow along with me. Sorry, just getting my headphones adjusted. Okay, so let me share screen, and I'm going to share terminal, and I'm going to blow this up so you can see it. Okay, and all the commands that I am running through are in the week 1, day 4 outline, just so they're documented somewhere. Just so you know, the things in the Google Doc are might be in uppercase. Terminal is case sensitive, so anything in the Google Doc, if you see an uppercase, just assume that it should be all lowercase letters instead.
How do you get to terminal again?
3 ways. Command Space, type in the word terminal and hit Enter. That's the quickest way. You can go to the applications folder and then open utilities, and then terminal should be in utilities. And then the third way is you should be able to get to it using Launchpad. Everyone have it open? Any problems getting to it? It should look something like this once you get it open.
Yeah, it's not like
Command space, brings up, and then software search.
I have it. I want to write this down. I know.
In a typing terminal.
What part of terminal did you say had to be lowercase again?
Oh, if you're looking at the week 1, day 4 outline, I've got a section towards the bottom that says command line list, and some of the letters in that are uppercase. I can just fix them. But most commands that you're running in the terminal, except for file paths, will all be lowercase. Everyone get it open? Any questions on that? We good to get started?
Yeah.
Okay. So first and foremost, the first thing that you have to understand about terminal is that anytime you're running a command, you're running the command in a folder. And that is not obvious when you open terminal for the first time. So when you run any command here, I think if we run date, we can see the date. And obviously the date is not a folder specific command, but when we run it, we are running it in a folder. So in order to know what folder we are running it in, we are going to type in pwd and hit enter. And that is going to give us the path that the folder we're currently in is. So from there, I now see that I'm in my users hack upstate folder, which means that if I switch to my Finder, no, not that Finder window. Where's the other? Okay. If I switch to my Finder and I go up to, ooh, I can't actually get to that. I'm going to hit Command-Shift-G and type in a slash, and that's going to take me to the root of my hard drive, right? The Macintosh HD. From there, that's the initial slash in the terminal. I'm going to go to my users, and you can see my hack upstate folder is there. So from there, I've got desktop documents, downloads, movies, music, pictures, public, right? So if I go back to my terminal, I want to see what my options are in the folder that I'm currently in. So I'm going to run the command ls, which stands for list, and that's going to tell me all the folders that I have access to in this current directory, which is in users hack upstate. So if I would like to get to my desktop, I'm going to type in cd, which stands for change directory, directory and folder, synonymous terms here, and I'm going to cd to my desktop. And if I hit enter on that command, I may get a little pop-up that says terminal would like to access files in your desktop folder. Go ahead and hit OK on that. Now, it says the word desktop here, but I don't really, how do I know that I'm actually in the desktop folder? Well, two ways. I can run the pwd command again, and you'll see if you compare that to the output of this command up here, now I've got desktop added to my path. So, in my desktop, if I now run ls, you'll see instead of getting all of the folders in my home folder, which is in users hack upstate, I'm now getting the files on my desktop.
Would it be enough?
What does PWD stand for again?
Print working directory.
Thank you, Karen, because I did not know that.
Like,
Years,
oh, okay.
Fine, so.
Someone said they have nothing. If you are in your desktop folder and there is nothing on your desktop, nothing will come out from the ls command. However, if you're in this folder, the user's home folder, and you print ls and you get nothing, we've got a different issue. Are we following so far?
It's enough.
I went to the bathroom, so I kind of missed out a little bit. But I got the understanding of like the desktop part.
Perfect. Yeah.
So if desktop is already showing, I don't have to double check and make sure it's in the desktop folder.
Yeah, so if you run pwd and the pwd command has /desktop at the end of it, that means you're in your desktop folder. And then if you ls, these happen to be the files on my desktop, but if you don't have any files on your desktop, there won't be anything in this command won't return anything.
Okay, I know that you can connect that, but.
Okay, and then when you went into your files, you did shift something to make sure that it was your hard drive. What did you do?
Oh, great question. In Finder, I hit Command Shift and G, and then typed a / in and hit Enter. And that is what took me all the way up to the top level of my hard drive. The Command Shift G thing isn't something you need to worry about. I was just showing where I was at in my hard drive. The Command Shift G isn't actually an actual terminal command. That's just like an advanced Mac tool kind of thing. Okay, from here, I'm in my desktop, right? But if I want to get... Yeah.
Before you get too far, Christie's is a little different. It's like connecting to her iPad as well. Like in her terminal, it has her name and then iPad.
Instead of saying MacBook Pro.
Do you want to share your screen?
Wait, I gotta get in. You do?
Give her a second. She's gonna get on Zoom so she can share.
When you exit out and then try to do it over.
Has everyone has everyone gotten to this point where they can ls and see their directory, they can cd into their desktop, and then they can see that they're in their desktop folder with a pwd command?
Oh, it's CD. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Was there a question about cd? Yeah. Spacing and casing matters here, right? So we can't do CD desktop all as one word. We shouldn't forget the capital D in desktop. It may work without it, but in general, you should try and get your casing to line up. And I'm seeing the answers in the remote chat, in the Zoom chat, so I'm glad you guys are following along as well. I haven't forgotten about you. I am remote too. Okay, I'm gonna move on. If you get into the screen share and you're Chris, I see you coming in now. I'll just wait for you to share your screen. Okay, so what? Click on the Apple icon in the top left portion of your screen. Okay, go to System Preferences. And then click on Network.
I see it.
4 row. Okay. And then click on Advanced in the bottom right. Oh, where did they put that? Give me 1 second. Okay. Go cancel out of this. And hit the back button in the top left of the window. And go to sharing. Sorry, I took you down the wrong path. Oh, that's super weird.
I don't have anything.
I was expecting Christy's MacBook Air to say iPad.
Yeah.
And you know what? I think this may be a weird thing in the Coworks network. I would just ignore the part that says Dan's iPad because the commands you're running are returning what I expect. So like the fact that when you pwd in your home directory, you get your actual username, and then when you ls, you get all the files in there. That's exactly what it should be doing. So I would just ignore the Dan's iPad part because I think there's some weird thing about the Coworks network that isn't actually going to impact like the result of you running commands in terminal.
Who is Dan?
No idea.
Okay.
There's some weird thing about the how the network is set up at Coworks, but I wouldn't worry too much about it.
Okay. So I will stop sharing. Thank you.
No problem. Okay, let me kick my share back off. Okay, so we know we're in the desktop folder, not only because it says desktop here, but if I run pwd again, it's going to show me my whole file path, right? Well, what if I want to get back up into my home folder, my user's home hack upstate? Well, I can copy this file path and type in cd space and paste in that whole thing. And when I hit enter and run pwd, it's going to show me I'm back in that file. But if I go back into my desktop, it would be a pain to have to type out the whole file path over and over again. So instead what I can do is I can type in cd space ... And the two periods are telling the terminal whatever folder I am in, I want to go up one level higher than the folder that I'm in. So if I click on that and hit enter, and run my pwd, you're going to see it did the exact same thing as if I changed my file path. So what that's letting me do is letting me use cd in two different ways. I can either use what they call an absolute path, so I can cd to my users, to my hack upstate, and get into my documents folder. And I have to hit OK to allow access if you get the pop-up. And pwd, and you can see I'm in my documents. But if I wanted to go up one folder, I could do cd ... If I wanted to go up two folders to get out of documents and all the way up to my users folder, I could do cd ... /... That's saying take me up two folder levels. And now you see it says I'm in users, and if I pwd, not only can I see my users path, but if I ls, I can see the 3 user accounts that I have created. Now, this doesn't have to match to your exact one. Obviously, your usernames are going to be different, and you probably only have the shared and hack upstate, or your one username. That's okay, right? Our files are different, and so you may be getting different output. But this should get you started in terms of folder navigation. Questions there? Are we understanding the every command we've run so far in terms of cd, in terms of the ... in terms of pwd, and in terms of in terms of ls?
Yes.
Yeah.
This may not make sense to you now because you may say, well, I could just use Finder for that. And so far you can. But there will be certain developer tools that only work in the terminal. And in order to get them working in the terminal, we're going to have to navigate around different folders in order to be able to tell the terminal what command we want to run where. And so being able to navigate that is super important. So let's have some fun. I'm going to cd to my users. And if you start typing in a file path, if you hit the tab command, it's going to auto-complete it for you. So I'm going to go to my users hack upstate desktop, and I'm going to pwd to make sure that I'm in my desktop, and then I want to make a new file. So to create a new file, I'm going to use the word touch, and I'm going to say hello world.txt. Make sure it doesn't have any spaces in it, and if you hit enter and look on your desktop, you should see that there is a new file called hello world.txt. Because we touched the file, which means it created the file for us. That's the only thing touch does, is make new files for us. Well, what if we want to edit that file, the contents of that file? We can use a command called nano and say nano hello world.txt, and I'm using my tab for my autocomplete, and that's going to put me in a little text editor. And I can say, hello world, Max is here. And to save that, down at the bottom, you see where it says write out? Write out means save. And when you see this little caret, that means that they mean the control key. So I'm going to hit Control O, and that's going to say, what file name would you like to write it to? Well, hello world.txt is already in there. That's what I want to save it to. So I'm going to hit Enter, and then I'm going to hit Control X to exit that text editor. And then I'm going to just double click on that file on my desktop, and you will see hello world, Max is here. So gonna take let me run through those steps one more time so you guys see them and can follow along, and then I'll take a pause and let you guys try it on your own. So I'm actually gonna start over from scratch. I'm going to, I want to delete that file. So I'm going to use a command called rm for remove, and I'm going to remove my hello world.txt. That deleted the file from my desktop. I'm then going to touch hello world.txt, and that created the file on my desktop. Then I'm going to say nano, which is going to get me into the text editor, and say hello world.txt is the file that I would like to edit, and it puts me into this text editor. But I have nothing in the file yet. So I'll say, this is my second time editing this file. Then I'm going to hit Control O, and that is going to say, where would you like to save it? And I'm going to just hit Enter down here to save it in Hello World. That is now saved. I could keep editing this file if I wanted to, but what I want to do is just exit out. So to exit out of Nano, I'm going to hit Control X, which is what it's telling you to do down here in the corner. Now I'm out of it. Now, when I go to my desktop, if I open that file, I should have a file that looks like this. So I'm going to take a moment and just let everyone try and create the file. Just give me a thumbs up if you've got it, or just say, like, move on, I'm ready for the next thing.
I need that little shortcut you did where it duplicated, like, your user's name, because that's a lot to type. And that's pretty much where I got stuck at, because I'm sitting there trying to type that and you kind of like move forward. So, like, what was it, like you said, where it would,
if you start typing it, so if you do CD space slash US and hit the tab button, it's going to say, oh, there's a users folder that starts with US, so it's going to autofill that for you. And then if you do slash after that and type in the first letter or two of your username and hit tab, it's going to auto-complete your username for you as well. And then
so you can... CD space and then a slash.
Yep. And then the capital U, lowercase s, for users.
Mm-hmm.
And then hit tab, and it should auto-complete the rest of the word users for you.
Right. Okay, I got you.
And then you just keep going there, right? So the next thing is going to be your username. And if you want a pro tip, if you hit tab twice, it will show you all of the options that you can type in there.
Yeah, I see. Thank you.
Is Nano just a text editor? Can it open any other kind of file? Just text.
Just text. And you will find that most of the time you'll want to use Visual Studio Code or some UI-based text editor, but there are some times that you're working on a server and you're like, I just need to change this one little file or tweak this one little thing, and that is what Nano is perfect for. There are some developers who swear by text editors called Emacs or Vim, which are also terminal-based text editors, and they like it so much that they won't use a tool like VS Code. They'll just use Emac or Vim. But there are certain topics that cause a lot of debate in the developer industry, and Emacs versus Vim is a notorious one. So if you go talk to any senior developer and say, are you an Emacs or a Vim person, they'll all have a preference. And it's just one of those things that people will debate it until they're blue in the face because it's all just preference.
Okay. Which one are you?
I'm a Nano guy, which is outside of Emacs versus Vim because Nano is super lightweight. It's nowhere near as powerful as Emacs or Vim. But my argument is if you need anything more powerful than Nano, you should probably go to a UI tool and use VS Code or something like that to edit. But if you had me at gunpoint and said Emacs or Vim and I didn't have another option, I'm an Emacs person.
And are Emacs and Vim, do you have to install those, or are they already, they're like Nano eds?
I believe they are like Nano and they are built in... Oh! Vim is built in, Nano is not. I'm sorry, Vim is built in, Nano is built in, Emacs is not. Okay, I'm getting thumbs up in the chat, so I think people are following along virtually. Last chance for anyone to ask questions about the terminal. You should have a file created on your desktop, and you should be able to edit it and save it in Nano and close out of Nano.
All right, so I just have one more question.
Yep.
Because I was still stuck on that other part. So when I get how to do the Nano text editor, but what are you putting when you're entering a text, or like the hello world part? What is the?
Oh, I just put in, if you're in Nano and down at the bottom, it has like Control X and Control O for write out and all of that. That's just saving content into the hello world file.
So after I'm already in the desktop, and then if I need to LS to confirm that I'm in the desktop, then I'll just literally just start typing hello world there.
No, you have to open Nano first. So you have to create the file. So you're going to run the command touch space hello-world.txt.
All right, thank you.
And then you would nano hello-world.txt. That's going to open Nano. Then you can put in the words, hi, and hit Control O and enter to save, and then Control X to exit.
Okay.
And these commands are not like things that you would always run sequentially the exact same way every time, right? Like, oh, I need to make a folder here. You may need to navigate, stuff like that. Okay. Couple more things in the terminal before we call it a successful first week. So, I'm in my desktop. I know I'm in my desktop because I can run pwd and I'm here. And I can run ls and see that I created my hello world.txt. But what if I want to see the file, the contents of that? Well, I can run a command called cat. Don't ask me what it stands for unless Karen knows. And type in hello and my tab. That's going to autocomplete. And then it will print out the contents of my file. This is the second time editing this file. Okay, that's great. But what if I want to create a new folder and move my file into that folder? So I'm going to use a command, mkdir, make directory, and I'm going to call it my folder. And if you look on your desktop, there is now a folder on your desktop called my folder. Exactly what we would think. Now, what happens if we would like to move our hello world into our folder? Sorry, I'm just updating the outline as I go here. What we can do is use the MV command, which stands for move, and we're going to say move hello world into my folder. And if I hit enter, you'll notice that that file disappeared from your desktop. And if you open the folder, you'll see the file in there. Or from the terminal, we could CD into my folder and LS and see that my hello world was there. Okay, great, but what if I want to move my hello world back out of that folder and back to my desktop? Now we're going to get tricky here. We're going to MV again, and the file we're going to move is our hello world, right? Our source is MV comes first. The second part is the file we want to move, and then where we want to move it to, I'm going to use that dot trick. I want to just move it up one folder level. I want to move it out of my folder and into my desktop. So I could type, yes.
So where you're typing is at the very bottom of the screen and we can't see it. So is there any way that can go up?
Yeah. Really, thank you. Are you on Zoom?
No, I got up so I could be.
But he has different stuff.
Yeah, the bottom of your terminal window.
Yeah, your bottom, the bottom of the terminal is like at the bottom of the screen and you can't see it. Can you shrink it just a tiny?
No, because it's gonna keep it down at the bottom. Can I? No, see, it's always gonna. Crap.
Put it the way that you had it. Let me see if I can fix it on this side.
So like mine.
Please.
Right, I like something.
It should be back to the way I had it.
We got those things. Alright, so we go over here, everything's back right there. Corresponds with it.
I don't know that I'm going to be able to fix it on my side.
Okay.
Where's my hello?
Oh, that's.
Is that all right?
I can read it from back here.
Can you guys read that?
Yeah.
Oh, no, I can't see that.
I just typed something. Can you see it?
Oh, yeah.
Is that better?
Yep.
So
If you go one bigger, does it get cut off?
Can I get some notes from it?
Thank you.
all right.
Oh, that's perfect.
Okay, try that.
Now it is. So
Yeah, so I mean, I did the MK BIR my folder.
so on the line where you use the move, and then right there where the mouse is users. So it says where's it down one.
Yeah,
Right
sorry.
there.
This one I screwed up. You can ignore that one.
Oh, okay. So yeah, that. So I tried to do that.
So what it should be is we're going to do mv hello world.txt, and then we're going to type in ... and that's going to say move it up one folder. Move the file up one folder. So if we do that, you should see hello world appear on your desktop again, because we essentially moved it out of the my folder and back into the desktop folder.
Mine did work. It said no such file for the record.
Okay, so what you want to do is run pwd and make sure that you're in my folder. And then run ls and see if there's anything inside the folder.
So I did ls, and it says my folder, but it doesn't say anything is in there.
Okay, so you would probably have to run that touch command again and create the file.
Oh, okay. So
And then once the file's created, then you would be able to move it.
Okay.
So does that apply to like no such file or directory?
Yeah, so if there's no such file or directory, two things to check. One, make sure that you're in the directory you think you're in. So run pwd and see if you're in my folder or if you're just in desktop. And then, okay, so if you cd into my folder and run ls again, hopefully you'll be able to see your file. And if you can see your file, then you can move it to a different folder using the MV command.
Mine is in there, but it's not working.
Oh, you want to share your screen?
That's gonna be hard because I got out of Zoom.
So we're near the end here. I've covered all of the commands I wanted to. I just want to show you guys one more, and that's that RM command. When you run RM, when you're in here, I'm gonna just CD up, and if I LS, if I want to delete my folder, I did that RM command, which will delete files. But in order for it to delete a folder, we have to use what is called a flag. And the flag is just a dash, and we're going to type in RF. It stands for recursive and something else, but the way I remember it is remove folder. And then we can type in my folder and hit enter, and that will have deleted the folder and any files inside the folder. And that's it. That's all I have for terminal commands. I will stay on for at least the next 10 minutes if anyone wants to share their screen and ask questions.
Oh, wait, go back.
Yep. Sorry.
I don't know what I did to get here, but.
Oh, but you have the stages, you know, there.
Oh, I got it to work, so the folder's gone, so.
Directly.
Oh, okay.
So before you execute any command, if you don't understand what the command is doing, you should not be executing it. So if you have a question before you run any command, just shout it out now, and I'll help you through it.
So just to be clear, do you have a copy of these commands in our?
You know, where can we find the list of
In
commands?
the outline, the J4 outline.
It's on the bottom.
Oh, they're on the bottom.
I definitely need to watch
I'm
the
gonna have to
video.
rewrite them over and put exactly what they do next one. I'm not sure what they do.
What was called this name of this activity?
So objectives here are you should be able to create a folder, should be able to create a file, should be able to move the file into the folder, should be able to add text to the file, and you should be able to delete the file and the folder.
And to delete a file, it's just RM and the file name?
Correct. And then if you're deleting a folder, it's RM space dash RF space and then the folder name. I'm adding this list to the day 4 outline right now. If you have been able to get through all of that, get out of here. I'm done with you. I will hopefully see you at office hours.
All right. Good night, everyone.
Thank you. Good night.
Yeah, good night. Thank you.
Good night, guys.
All right, Karen, can you tell me where I'm at? Help me do this real quick. I was already stuck on the other person. You move forward. Right, so I'm trying to get a touch. Are you going down to THT? Or you just have to be touched?
Like, I can't think, like, to make us more organized.
So that's
It's organized, you cannot have it. Like adding
So in order
cards
to
and
create
putting
it's
in
gonna be
descriptions.
10 pages.
Just make sure I remove what it is. Try to.
I have added that list to the outline in case anyone has questions. I'm realizing that I forgot to go over homework, so I will touch on that during office hours. But if you have any questions about homework whatsoever, just Slack me. And if you have questions about Slack, show up at office hours and I can answer any Slack questions there.
Alright, so now do MKDIR.
Dang, I really wish light will come on now.
I'm going to hop unless anyone still has questions.
Wait, hold on, because Sanjay is going to join the Zoom. Hers is coming up as read only, and I don't know why.
Okay.
So I'm going to join the Zoom so that she can share her screen with you.
Okay.
Yeah, they weren't out this far, so they got to go. I would
Move
just.
this back a little bit, so he's probably good right here, so she moves up. Like, yeah, so this, leave it like that.
Well, they weren't up this far though. You got to get. It's like that one's back. That one's good where it's at, I think, maybe.
We do this one back to here, and this one, this one